All right, welcome to part 2 of how I healed my trauma. And if you don't know what my trauma story is, maybe you want to watch that if you're watching this video. And we'll link to that in the description below. So definitely go watch that. It may give you some context, although I don't know that you need to watch these how I healed my trauma videos. But there is also a part 1, so if you haven't seen that, make sure to watch that first. Otherwise, you'll feel probably a little lost in this one. And we'll link to that as well. So we're in part 2. I'm going to take off where I left off in part 1. And that was at 26 and a half, I ended my turbulent relationship that kind of brought all of the trauma to the surface for me to heal and really look at. And then I entered a period of pretty deep depression and questioning my purpose and why I'm here on this planet and what I'm supposed to do with my life. And that's kind of where we are in my story. All right, so at 26 and a half, I was still living in South Carolina, which I did not like. I never intended to be there for very long. I was supposed to be there for a year, and a month after I moved in 2004, I met the guy that I ended up in that relationship with. And it was one of those life incisions that totally rerouted the direction I thought I was going. And looking back now, it all makes perfect sense. But at the time, I felt really, really lost after the relationship ended because I'd given up directing my life in terms of what I'm pursuing for myself, for a career, to be in this relationship, work on myself, and stay in the family business, which I knew I didn't want to be in forever. So I believe that is pertinent to my healing story, or how I healed my trauma, because a lot of the time I think those of us with deep trauma wounds do end up pursuing careers that either are going to provide some kind of solution for us. So, you've heard the saying, a lot of people who need psychotherapy the most end up pursuing psychotherapy as a career. So there's that. I think it's perfectly valid. And I think sometimes we can use our career to completely dissociate from our traumatic past and create a new identity for ourselves that may or may not actually help us heal at the root level. I think for a lot of people, it ends up being an escape, and they end up having to, look at their past later. So there I am at 26 in South Carolina. I have no real friends, and I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. I have no money. I have no savings. And the first thing that kind of sparked for me was the idea of becoming a holistic health coach and doing nutrition coaching or eating coaching, because it was something deeply personal to me from those years of being a teenager all the way through 26 and a half, where, I hated my body. I loathed it. I would eat 3 donuts, as a coping mechanism when I was younger, and then hate myself for it, and then punish myself mentally, and then go try to run it off or work it off at the gym, only to end up eating, an entire pizza or 3/4 of a pizza later that week, and then hate myself for that. It was this whole thing for me, and I kind of came to see by the time I was 26 that there was a deep relationship there with me with food that could ultimately be healing, but I wouldn't say that I had healed it yet at all. However, it drew me. It drew me. There was something in it that drew me to this idea of health coaching and eating, and figuring out how you can look at a whole person's history and biography and who they are through their eating habits. So I enrolled in a program called the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, and signed up for the 2007 school year. And I ended up also moving to Las Vegas, where my brother had moved from South Carolina to Las Vegas. So I actually moved in with my brother for a year in Las Vegas while I was attending the school, which was in New York. And I went through a whole year of this training, or 10 months, of nutrition coaching training and flying to New York once a month or twice a month while working full time, while living in Las Vegas. And at the end of it, decided, nope, this wasn't it. And now I was like deeply in debt because I'd put all of that on a credit card. And there was something for me about the idea of nutrition coaching, the way that I was taught to do it at IIN was to look at the whole person's history and their emotions and, you know, really be like an empathetic ear and listen to them and the healing potential there with listening to people and then coaching them through making their own food choices in order to have more freedom and feel empowered around food choices and, you know, get out of disordered eating behaviors or lose weight or whatever. And at that time, there was this like big conversation on the internet and in the coaching world around do you have to have figured yourself out to be a coach? And what I kept getting sold on was absolutely not. If you have like imposter syndrome or you feel like you're a fraud or you haven't figured yourself out yet, that's no reason you can't make a great living being a health coach. And if it is a problem for you or, you know, that's, you know, your stuff to work on. And something about it deeply did not resonate with me. And now I know why. And I am including this here in part of my healing story of my trauma because I firmly believe that if we are going to seek help from someone, whether it's a therapist, whether you're in pain and looking to get out of pain, whether, you know, it's eating, go find someone who figured it out for themselves and succeeded. That's the person you should be asking for help from. And if they haven't figured it out and they don't know what they're doing, but they're pretending they do because that's what they've been told or trained to do, you know, to make a career out of something, I think it's probably not the best place to go for answers, personally. So now I know that's why that didn't feel really right to me. So I continued my search of like, what am I supposed to do with my life? And at that time I was trying to decide between personal training and massage. Obviously, like you can see the theme here, I was deeply interested in all things health. And I think for a reason, like I was probably drawn to health because I don't think you can be healthy, you know, and have unhealed trauma. It's going to fester somewhere. It's going to manifest as physical pain, or it's going to manifest as an eating disorder, or it's going to manifest as, you know, depression or anxiety or digestive issues. I mean, you name it, right? So this was not conscious at all. It wasn't like, oh, I'm still so traumatized, I'm going to figure out if I can do a career that will also help me heal. Nope. It was 100% unconscious, compulsive, like drawn to these things. So I was weighing personal training and massage therapy in 2008 after graduating from the IIN program. And personal training, like I was super fit at the time. I was actually like working out at a gym 5 to 6 days a week. I weighed 137 pounds, way less than I do right now. I was a gym rat, but something about the personal training thing didn't quite fit for me at the time. So I decided to go to massage school, and I ended up moving back to South Carolina to go because it was a cheaper program, and I don't need to give you all the details, but the fact that I moved back to South Carolina is definitely a part of this story for me. So I moved back in with an aunt of mine in South Carolina to go to this massage school for 6 months. My plan, again, best laid plans, right? So I had this plan of moving back to South Carolina only for the duration of this program, and then I wanted to come back west, and probably I was going to move back to California. Like that's where I really felt drawn, which is where I mostly grew up. And I ended up going through this bout of extreme pesticide poisoning a couple of weeks after moving in with her, which sent me on another healing trajectory and definitely is related to some of the stuff I've been going through in the last 2 years with mercury poisoning. There's like a mirror here. But I ended up in massage school, and while I was in massage school, one of my teachers brought up this thing called Rossiter, which is a form of stepping on people. And he wanted to know who wanted to try it, and my hand shot up immediately. It was just like, me, that sounds really interesting. You're going to step on me. And he was offering a demo of the calf technique they do for stepping on people. And I find that really interesting with my biography. Like, of all the things he could have demoed, it would be the calf. And I can't help but think that this is like karmic in some way, if you believe in karma or destiny. But the moment he stepped on me, like in the instant I was first stepped on, I got this like overwhelming feeling in my body that I would be okay. And okay had a feeling definition, like an imagination that came with it. It wasn't like a mental construct for me, but it meant, okay meant I'm going to heal fully, I'm going to hike and run again, and I'm going to have peace and happiness in my life from being stepped on. Really interesting, right? And I had no idea what just happened at the time. I had like very few words for it. I just knew there was something to the stepping on people thing and fascia that I had to find out more about. And so I was eagerly awaiting the workshop with Richard Rossiter, who invented this method of stepping on people. That was happening a few months later. And interestingly, it happened to be part of our curriculum in the massage school, so it was already paid for with my massage training. And this only happened twice in the history of Rossiter and massage. Like, I don't think he's ever done that in any other massage school. And they mandated it to be part of the training. So this was just, again, really interesting karma and timing that I happened to be there. And this part of my healing story has a lot to do with my knees, but this is also deeply connected to my emotional trauma. So I need to give a little bit of backstory in case you don't already know, and this is going to be repetitive for some of you that do already know, but when I was 17, my knees, well, actually one knee, my left knee, started hurting when I would run. Only when I would run and not when I was hiking until later. So by the time I was 22, I was really afraid that if I kept running, I might ruin my knee so much that I wouldn't be able to hike anymore. And that really scared me because I really love to hike. So I stopped running at age 22 and shrunk my world. And then at age 24, on my way to South Carolina from California, I did a road trip and stopped. I was going to stop in Yosemite, Zion, and the Grand Canyon and do some hiking, and Bryce Canyon, and do some hiking on my way to South Carolina. I was by myself, and my first stop was Yosemite, and I wanted to hike Half Dome and back, which is like 18 or so miles, depending on where you start, from start to finish. And at that time, you didn't need a permit to do the cables, so I fully planned on doing the cables, the whole thing. And probably a mile and a half or so below the cables, my only bad knee, which was the left one at the time, went out on me, took me to the ground with knife-like stabbing pain, and really, really, really terrified me because I was by myself. I didn't have any gear for spending a night out in the wilderness if it came to that. And I had to go downhill, like 4,000 feet of elevation descending on a bad knee. And I took the shorter route, shorter mileage route, which ended up being a really bad choice because it was a stair route, like a really steep route of a lot of rocks and stairs. And by the time I got to the bottom, I had two bad knees. My right knee hurt as bad as my left. And I did end up going to Bryce Canyon, Zion, and the Grand Canyon. But all I could do was get out of my car and take a picture like all the other tourists. And it just killed me. But what also happened at the time is I shrunk my world again. Because that pain, that physical pain of being out there by myself on a mountain and having that much pain and not knowing where it came from, what to do about it, whether it would ever come back or go away, or why it was happening, scared me so much. I without going to a doctor or trying to fix it or see anyone, I just made an internal decision, not super consciously, that I didn't want to let this new pain of both knees while hiking limit me so much that I couldn't even work out in a gym. Like, it terrified me to be so debilitated I couldn't even work out in a gym. And so I shrunk my world, stopped hiking, and by the time I got to South Carolina, I just, there are no mountains there anyway, so it wouldn't have mattered. But I shrunk my world and began my career as a gym rat, like 5 to 6 days a week, 2 hours every time. And I was fine to work out in a gym. My knees didn't hurt. But I'm bringing this up right now because to me, to separate my knee pain from my trauma story would make it incomplete. And I've told my knee pain story elsewhere and left out the trauma piece, except maybe mentioning it, because I do think there's like a physical component happening there as well. But I want to include it here because it feels profoundly important to how I healed my trauma. So what I see now in hindsight that happened is at age 17, I completely dissociated from my emotions and stopped feeling any emotions at all. And they have to go somewhere, right? They have to go somewhere, and they go into the body carries them. And so, like, for me to be an authentic human being, which I actually think all of us are regardless, like, there's authenticity happening in all of us, maybe not fully expressed by you, but it might be getting expressed by your body. So my body was expressing my authenticity of, like, I'm in pain. And so my knees were hurting, and at the same time, my body was helping me mirror through my experience of life something else that was happening at the same time, which was a deep fear of mine that it was so broken and defective that I would never know what it feels like to be at peace or to feel happy. I was so traumatized and so trapped inside, but when I say trapped inside, I feel like I banished the part of me and imprisoned a part of me so far away, like so deep down, that I didn't even know where she was. She was in my body, but mentally I couldn't reach her. Like, it became impossible. And I think this is why that moment when I was first stepped on, what I believe actually happened is when at 24, I started, actually even before that. So I mentioned in part 1 that I was doing a lot of journaling before 24. I traveled by myself at age 20 to Costa Rica, Ecuador, and the Galapagos Islands. And then at 22, I went to Malaysia. So I was traveling, and I brought my journals with me, and I did a lot of journaling while I was traveling. And when I look back and read those journals, it's so sad. It's so sad when I read them, because I was searching for myself out there in the world. Like, I think I thought if I traveled to these different places, I might find myself. And ironically, everywhere I went, there I was, and yet there I wasn't, because I was buried under so many layers of protection mechanisms and dissociation tactics, because at 17, I just couldn't feel any more pain. But it was all here in my body. And the moment that I was stepped on, I think what happened was, it was like, there I am. That's what I've been searching for all this time. Like, there she is. I didn't have that conscious thought until much later in looking back on all of this, but I definitely think that's what happened at a visceral level. The searching I had been doing from 17, or about 20 actually, from 20 to 28, like culminated in, there I am, and I'm in here, and I'm in this stuff called fascia, I guess. And for me at the time, it was 100% about my knee. So I want to be super clear about this, because I'm telling you this story in hindsight, hoping you can kind of like pull some pieces for yourself that might be useful, or get an aha about yourself that might be useful. I had no awareness that this had anything to do with my trauma at the time. I 100% believed it was only about my knee or knees. So I believed I would be okay, but I believed that had to do with my knees. I had no idea how metaphorical my knees were and my ability to hike and run and do what I wanted. So for me, hiking and running represented freedom. It represented joy. It represented me doing what I wanted with my life and having the freedom to do that, and then experiencing joy as a result, because those were the things that gave me joy before. So I know that now. I didn't know this then. And this feels really critical for me to just keep saying. So 28, I'm getting stepped on, and I'm like, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to hike and run again. And I had to wait a couple months for this 3-day workshop with Richard Rossiter. And I was so excited. I brought my running shoes to the workshop and was like, I told him, you are going to help me run again for the first time in 6 years. I haven't been able to run in 6 years, but I think this is going to do it. And I want you to stay back at lunch, if you will, and help me run again. He laughed and humored me, and he stayed back at lunch, and we tried like 3 or 4 different techniques. And I would, after each technique, lace up my shoes and then go try to run, like just out the door. And I would get about 1 block, and then the same knife-like pain would happen in my knees that kind of buckles, the pain is so bad, it would like buckle my knee under me and almost take me to the ground. And I came back and I was like, try something else. And so he tried this like 3 or 4 times. And then after the 4th time, I came back and I said, try something else. And he looked at me and he asked, do your knees hurt when you don't run? And I said, no. And he goes, well, then don't run. And this felt pretty disappointing, and it didn't deter me. Like, I was holding both of those at the same time. And it set me off on this career trajectory of like, I knew I would be good at this work. There was something about it that felt right for me. It felt, unlike the eating thing and the nutrition, this felt deeply ingrained in my DNA somehow. Like, I was born to do this, stepping on people thing. And I'm not going to give you the full story of my career because that's not pertinent here. But I actually went another 2 years living in South Carolina, 2 or 3 years after this, after 2008 to 2009, and completed my massage training, got my license, and started working in a chiropractor's office. And then it was a 2-year period after that 2009 graduation where I stayed in South Carolina, working in Georgia as a massage therapist at first for a year, and then starting to step on people part-time. And then in 2011, I decided to move to Boulder, Colorado. And it was a very impulsive move. Like I told you, I was really depressed throughout this time. I felt trapped in the South. I wasn't making enough money to have savings. I was making just enough money to like pay my bills. I had to actually move back in with my parents after the pesticide poisoning at my aunt's. I didn't feel physically vibrant or vital. Again, I had 1 friend, so I finally made a friend. I hadn't had a friend, like any friends before this. But I felt really lonely. I missed the West Coast, the West of the United States. I missed like a group consciousness around me of like striving towards evolution, towards personal growth, towards, taking care of this planet, all things consciousness. It wasn't there for me in the South. And yet I didn't see a way out. And this is also really fascinating for me to look back on because I think it also mirrored the inner reality I was experiencing at the time, or had been for a while. Like, I feel trapped inside. I don't know how to get out. I feel like there's this reality out there that's available to me if someone could just point the way. Like this, so my inner reality was for sure getting mirrored in my external reality. And then this chance opportunity arose for me to attend this event in Arizona, and I ended up calling a woman that I had reconnected with, that I'd gone to junior high and high school with, So she, and some of you are going to know her name. Her name is Jess, and she and I had been talking on the phone and kind of reconnecting after quite a while of not being in contact. And I convinced her to come to this event with me in Arizona. And I convinced my parents to give me just enough money to get there. And then I was going to figure out how to get to Colorado. I packed my car with whatever would fit in it and threw away the rest or put it in storage in South Carolina and headed to Arizona. Met Jess there. And we attended this event, and it was really cool, and it changed her life. And she had actually sworn to me she would never move to Colorado, because a year prior I was trying to get her to think about moving there with me and trying to scheme and plan it. And at that point she said, I'll follow you anywhere. Where do you want to go? And I said, I want to go to Boulder. And so we took off from Sedona, Arizona to Boulder, Colorado. And there was something about that trip that I still... I'll actually put a picture or two on screen here, but like it totally disrupted the pattern I had been in for years of I'm stuck, there's no way out, I'm never going to be free. And I suddenly felt so free. Like I felt jubilant, I felt euphoric, like I had no money and no idea what was going to happen, but I've never felt like I can feel it now, like, wow, there was a freedom I had in those, that like 1 month period that I'm not even sure I can tap into now. It was just so palpable. We were camping and living out of our car and then doing an occasional like Airbnb thing. I don't know what it was back then because I don't think Airbnb existed, but I don't know. It was awesome. And I'm sharing this with you because I definitely think this had to do with my trauma. Like I desperately needed to leave my family, and I desperately needed to leave the environment in which I felt so depressed. Like I needed to change my environment. And regardless of like, it's not about blaming my family or blaming the South or anything like that. It was like, I needed a change of scenery to do something different. Like I needed, it's the definition of insanity to do the same thing over and over and expect a different result. So if I'm depressed and lonely and I don't like my life and I'm in South Carolina, do something different, leave. And it absolutely catapulted me into the next phase of healing my trauma. So we arrive in Boulder, Colorado in 2011 and end up in this mountain house. And there was like no way that I was going to live in Colorado and not hike and run. So I asked for Jess's help to heal my knees. And I right away, as soon as we moved in, and she agreed to learn how to step on me. So I started teaching her how to step on me. And then I'd be stepping on her, she would be stepping on me. And we went through like several weeks of lots of stepping on each other, giggled our asses off. Like we laughed so much because it was so intense, and had a lot of fun with it, but it was also like really intense, being stepped on. And then, it came time to like put it to the test. Like, let's see if it helped my knees. And we went for one very short run, and my knees hurt the same as they've always hurt me. And yet I felt really different. So I felt different, even though my knees still felt the same. And I was sure something would work if we could just figure it out. And I have no idea whether this was my idea or Jess's idea, but it arose through our conversations to have her work on me while we were running, like not while we were running, but on the trail in between running. One place in particular, my calves. So if you know anything about knee pain, and here at Mobility Mastery, I have resources for knee pain. The number one thing I'm going to have you try is the calf release technique. Not just because it's worked for me, but because it's, anatomically makes the most sense for especially lateral knee pain. Anyway, so it was like the thing that I wanted to try. And the first time we did this experiment of her working with me on the trail to heal my knees, we picked a route that was really committing. It was a loop. If we had to turn around and go back the way we came, it would have been actually like a ton of uphill or downhill, depending on which way we went. And I don't know, I was just convinced it would work. And that first time we went out, my knees hurt like they always did the first little part of the run. And then we figured out how she could actually like work on me on the trail on this calf. Like she would be kneeling, you know, I would put my leg on her knee, you know, that was up off the ground. And then I would put my fist in my calf and she would clamp down. And then even with my running shoes on, I would point and flex and circle my foot. And then we would keep running. And what happened on this first run is that after that first time of doing this while running, I got 30 seconds of pain-free running. And I still remember it to this day. It still gives me chills when I think about it. Those 30 seconds felt like an eternity, like bliss, like the most amazing 30 seconds of my life. And then, yes, the pain came right back just as bad as it always had. And Jess worked with me, I think 10 or 12 times on that run, like a lot. But every time she did, I would get 30 seconds of pain-free running. So it was consistent 30 seconds. And we arrived home and I was like, let's do it again. Like, I want to stretch those 30 seconds into a minute and then a minute into 2 minutes. And we'll do it as many times as we have to. And she agreed. So a few days later, we went out to run again. And something really surprising happened on this run where the first 5 to 10 minutes of the run was pain-free for me. Like, she didn't even have to work on me. And then the pain came back as bad as it ever did. And we ended up doing, you know, maybe 5 or 6, but I was getting 5 to 10 minutes of pain-free running. And I was like, that was it for me. I was elated. I was convinced it was going to 100% work at that point. And we did one more trail run, the same loop with the same intention. And she only had to work on me about once. And I really haven't needed to do that on the trail to be able to run since then. So it took 3 times of doing that. The reason I'm sharing this story here in my trauma healing story is because I'm 1,000% convinced that this experience of healing my knees opened the door for the deeper traumas to come through. And I also am convinced that a lot of it had to do with how much fascia release we were actually doing with each other, because we were moving layers out, moving some of the past shit out, like those top layers, and it allowed what was deeper in me to come to the surface for healing. So when I look back at this story now, I'm amazed at how instinctive it was for me and how oblivious I was to the metaphor here and how it would change the rest of my life, because I thought it was just about my knees and just about running and hiking and my determination to run and hike again. But what I know now is that our bodies are reflecting to us our internal reality, like what we believe and our deepest fears, and they're playing out nervous system patterns and neural loops, and it's very, very physical. And if you can interrupt a physical neural loop, like a belief that you will always be in pain and you will never be free, even if your pain is emotional, it's a physical pattern, like a neural loop in your body. And if you can interrupt it at the physical level, the rest will change too. So I had no idea that that was a thing. Neural loops wasn't part of my vocabulary at the time. This was 2011. Nervous system patterns, not part of my vocabulary. I knew nothing at all about the nervous system. So I'm sharing that because I absolutely believe that whatever has our attention the most and whatever pain we're willing to listen to that is actually talking helps us heal. So it could be knee pain, it could be digestive issues, it could be anxiety, it could be a relationship, but it's there right now in your life in front of you talking to you. Whatever is talking to you right now is the thing you can use to heal. And it might not seem like it has to do with trauma, but it probably does if you're someone who has trauma and your body is getting your attention. So for me, this was like a huge part of my story. So after healing my knees, I mean, I started hiking again, I started running again, I started climbing 14ers in Colorado. I became euphoric, like so happy that I was outside, and it was that feeling that I had in 2008, like I'm gonna be okay. And it fully came, like that moment for me in 2008 when I was first stepped on came full circle for me in the summer of, I think it was 2000, oh gosh, I'm gonna mess this up, but like 2014 maybe. Anyway, I think I'm getting this wrong. But regardless, one of the summers in Colorado for me, I actually took 30 days by myself and traveled from Boulder into Idaho and Wyoming and a little bit of Utah and Idaho, and went camping by myself for the first time ever and did a bunch of hiking. And it was something that I kind of knew I had to do. It terrified me. And I don't know, I wanted to see what would happen doing this by myself. But I think for me, this was a big metaphor of like, can I hold myself? Can I own my body and my life and my emotions? And can I come home to myself? Really, that's what it was for me. And the summer that happened, I found myself in Wyoming, way up there by myself. Like there were so few people out there in the middle of the wilderness. Like I could feel the grizzlies out there. I don't know if you've ever had that experience. Just really palpable wildness. And it suddenly hit me in a way that I hadn't been struck before consciously, that I was no longer afraid. I was no longer afraid of physical pain or of feeling trapped in my body and not free. And I actually like fell to the ground and just cried and felt, it was just the most profound gratitude I think I've ever felt in my life. And I have felt that ever since that moment, the rest of my life feels like gravy. Like whatever happens from here on out is like, it's all good. Like for me to arrive at that moment that I thought I would never arrive at, was like so healing for me. And it absolutely had to do with my body and hiking and running, but it was also that more metaphorical meaning, you know, the deeper meaning of it. And now I could actually like project that new meaning of like, I am a free being and I've come home to myself and I am no longer afraid of my body and I love my body. And oh my God, my body carried all of this for me until I could heal it. That paved the way for me to do a deeper healing shortly thereafter. And it occurred, shocker, through another intimate relationship. So I'm in Colorado and I can hike again, I can run again, I feel really free for the most part, and there's still this other piece that's like festering and coming to the surface now. And what I know in looking back at this story is that the time that Jess and I spent together in the attempt to heal my knees did something totally unexpected and unplanned, which is we were moving out of my body a lot of layers of accumulated physical tension and trauma that had been stored here. And I absolutely know and believe that it paved the way for the next part of my healing to happen in pretty rapid succession, because it happened pretty soon after this, and it happened in an intimate relationship. So this is going to be part 3 of my trauma healing story, and just a little bit of foreshadowing for you of what's to come in that one is I'm going to dive into a relationship with somebody that I ultimately know I shouldn't jump into when I meet him at age 33. And I can't help myself again. However, the theme that played out was very different from the relationship I had when I was 24. So I'm going to talk about that and how this next relationship that I went through and the subsequent emotional unraveling and a few pieces of this story were critical for my healing. And the themes here for me that I'll be talking about in this third part are, how our intimate relationships are a reflection of our current inner state and our healed trauma or unhealed trauma, as well as using that experience to heal and to integrate those pieces into ourselves so we can move forward. And also the role that family plays and talking about trauma and confronting people and being public about it definitely plays a role in this story. And this one's less about the physical, and again, kind of coming back to more the psychological. So if I actually had to sum up these three phases, I think the first would be a lot of emotional pain that I had to heal from 24 to 26 and a half and confront. And then the second piece was the physical for me. And then this third piece is the psychological, which I would actually say is different from the emotional. So when I say psychological, I mean the deep psyche and what is living in the subconscious and the patterns that we create at that subconscious level from trauma that end up dictating a lot of our relationships and a lot of the patterns in our lives. So that's what I am going to be talking about in the third video, is how I confronted and healed that piece of the psyche. So I hope to see you in part 3 if it's interesting to you. And if you'd like to share a comment or a thought below this video, I would love to read it. If you have any questions for me about trauma, then I would love to read that. And if I can be helpful, I will try. So I will see you in the comments, and then I'll see you in part 3.